Hi there, I'm Jim Zirin. Welcome back for more conversations. Chris Whipple is with us. Chris is a man for all seasons, an author, documentary filmmaker, and TV producer. His latest book, The Fight of His Life, is about the first 2 years of the Biden presidency. With remarkable access to Biden's inner circle, including White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain, Secretary of State Antony Blinken, CI Director Bill Burns, and even the president himself, Chris takes us inside the Oval Office, where the Biden team makes the key decisions. Many books lose their relevancy as events overtake them. This book acquires greater relevancy every day, with the president's fight continuing as he confronts the classified documents investigation, the resignation of Ron Klain, the balloon, and the debt ceiling crisis. We're delighted to welcome Chris Whipple back to the program.
Now, great to be with you.
Chris, congratulations on your book. It's an important book and a great contribution to the historical record. And
thanks for the kind words.
I'm always curious about titles. The Fight of His Life. What did you mean when you wrote The Fight of His Life?
You know, Jim, Joe Biden, I think you could argue that his entire life, his whole career has been a fight against adversity and tragedy and bad luck. He lost his wife and infant daughter in a car crash. He lost his son, Beau, to a brain tumor. He ran and lost the race for presidency twice. His father always said, "Get up," and he did. He got up and he won the presidency at last. And I think that only to be confronted by a Russian tyrant invading a democracy in the heart of Europe, and I call that the fight of his life, and hence the title.
But at the time you wrote the book, we didn't know that classified documents would be discovered in his office and in his home, and we didn't know that China was going to send a surveillance balloon over the United States.
We didn't know a lot.
We didn't know a lot.
When I started the book, we didn't even know that Putin would invade Ukraine. So maybe I got lucky with the title. It certainly feels appropriate now. But, you know, my first two books, Jim, The Gatekeepers about the White House Chiefs of Staff, The Spy Masters about the CIA directors, covered something like 100 years of history between them. This book covers 2. But this was the biggest challenge. This was tougher than either of my previous books, because when you try to write history about a White House in progress, it's like designing an airplane in mid-flight. You're getting buffeted by a COVID variant that comes out of nowhere, and an invasion in Europe that comes from somewhere else. You don't know where you're going to land. You're just hoping you can land it safely. So this book was a tremendous challenge to do, particularly because compounding that was the fact that this is the most battened down, disciplined, leak-proof, on-script White House in recent memory. And of course, I had to get inside, and I had to get the key players to talk to me candidly. And it's all the more rewarding having been able to do that.
Well, your principal source, of course, was the White House Chief of Staff, Ron Klain. No secret from reading the book, you're quite a fan of his. What do you see as his strengths now that he's left office and Jeff Zients is?
Well, you know, there's a reason why great White House chiefs are hard to come by, because they have this extraordinarily rare skill set, which Klain had, which James A. Baker III had under Ronald Reagan, which Leon Panetta had under Bill Clinton. But it's rare, and it's White House experience, it's knowledge of Capitol Hill, it's political savvy, it's a world-class temperament, which is an often unappreciated attribute for the great chiefs, but they all have it. And then there's the relationship with the boss. You've got to have a really good working relationship, and nobody had a longer relationship than Ron Klain. 36 years working for Joe Biden. What that enables a White House chief to do is tell the president what he doesn't want to hear. there are numerous examples I can give you of Klain having done that. One of my most dramatic scenes, I think, in the book was when I went to see Klain 9 months into the presidency at the low point of the Biden presidency. Build Back Better, you remember, and the bipartisan infrastructure deal were twisting in the wind. Biden went off to Europe empty-handed, in effect. He went to the Glasgow Climate Conference without anything to show for it. He had said, Biden himself had said at that time that the fate of his presidency depended on passing these bills, and they were dead in the water. I went and saw Klain that weekend, that Saturday, and we sat on the patio outside his West Wing office, and he told me he was considering resigning. This was 9 months in. Long story, he decided to stay because he wanted to see Biden through the midterms. And what he did, which only a White House chief of staff can do, is the president wanted to go everywhere and talk about everything, wanted to brag about his record. Biden sat him down and said, Mr. President, you're going to go to the states where we think you could do the most good. And number two, you're going to talk about women's reproductive rights and the threat to democracy from MAGA. Well, Biden followed that script, and the rest is history. He defied the odds in those midterm elections. So that's an example of Klain's effectiveness.
Do you see the role of the White House chief of staff as being the puppeteer and the president as the puppet?
No, and you know I don't, having read The Gatekeepers. But it's a critical relationship. You have to have a good working relationship between the White House chief and the president to be effective. And every president learns, often the hard way, that you cannot govern effectively without empowering a White House chief as first among equals to execute your agenda. It doesn't work if you have famously, it was called the spokes of the wheel, where you've got 6 or 7 or 8 advisors coming and going into the Oval without anybody in charge. That's a recipe for disaster. And Biden, having been around and having seen the great ones and the not so good ones, he knows the importance of the chief.
Well, Klain was well known for his collegial kind of style and bringing people into the tent. Also well known for being pretty hard-nosed. I mean, there are no real leaks during his tenure as chief of staff, and I can't think of any great dramatic moment as there were in the Trump administration, who had 4 chiefs of staff in, I guess, 4 years.
This is why I say, Jim, that temperament is a really unappreciated attribute for the great chiefs. Baker had it, Panetta had it, Klain has it. I think Jeff Zients has it, by the way, Klain's successor. Klain never got too high when things were going well or too low when things were down, and he had this collegial management style. Everybody liked him.
Let's look at Biden's trajectory over the 2 years. I mean, he joked in an offline at the UN General Assembly that he was like the guy who jumped off the Empire State Building, and when he reached the 50th floor, he said, so far, so good.
Yeah.
We see he got high marks really for restoring confidence after Trump. I would give him very high marks for that. But then also high marks for the pandemic. And then there set in some setbacks, Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What was his problem over Afghanistan?
Well, look, I see my book and the Biden presidency as a political thriller in 3 acts. The first act was the unbelievably fraught transition between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, which was the most contentious and bitter and as it turned out, the bloodiest since the Civil War. And we didn't know the half of it. I mean, I have untold stories in my book about how it really came down to one very low-profile Trump staffer, a deputy White House chief of staff, who under Trump's nose and without his knowledge kept the wheels of the transition turning, did all the necessary work to make sure that there was, in fact, a transfer of power at noon on January 20th. It's an incredible, untold story, considering the oceans of ink that have been written about that period. The second act was the first year of the Biden presidency, and that was largely overshadowed by the bungled exit from Afghanistan, without a doubt. And that set off, that triggered a long slide in Joe Biden's approval rating. And it really shattered the notion that, dented the notion that that competence was his brand. And then the third act of the presidency, in my view, started on February 24, 2022, when Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Joe Biden rose to meet that moment as only, I think, Joe Biden could have. He was uniquely prepared for that moment in history. He'd spent his career preparing for this kind of a crisis, even though nobody saw it coming until a few months before. But I think that was the turning point of this presidency. Not long afterward, of course, he passed a string of legislation, including some bipartisan legislation. And of course, it culminated in defying all the expectations during the midterm elections in 2022. So I think those are the three acts. Afghanistan is a story I tell in great detail, as you know. I don't know anybody else who has been able to talk to Ron Klain and Tony Blinken and General Mark Milley and CIA Director Bill Burns to get the inside story. And what it was a lot more dramatic than you might have guessed behind closed doors. Tony Blinken told me in no uncertain terms that everything they did was based on a fatally flawed intelligence assessment that the Afghan government would last for 18 months. Now, this was news to CIA Director Bill Burns when I went and sat down with him over at Langley, and we talked about it, and Director Burns said, wait, hold it. He said, we were clear-eyed about the fragility of the Afghan. We said that if you took away two legs of the stool, namely the U.S. military and the American contractors, that was a recipe for everything crumbling quickly. And General Mark Milley gave me yet another estimate in which he said, we were told they would last until Thanksgiving. At the end of the day...
But isn't this a typical Washington blame game, that one bureaucrat blames another bureaucrat for whenever there's a governmental failure?
Of course, it always happens. It always happens when there's a disaster. And at Langley, you may recall from my book on the CIA directors, the spy masters, that there's a saying out at Langley, CIA headquarters, that there are only policy success in this town. There are only policy successes and intelligence failures. They always get blamed, right? So that is somewhat, not shocking to learn. What was shocking to me was the extent to which, we look at this White House and it's a very well-run operation and it looks pretty smooth on the surface. But what I discovered that there was all this furious paddling going on underneath, and debate and argument about, in this case, how long the Afghan government would last. At the end of the day, they didn't have enough troops. They had a cap of 700 troops trying to get everybody out. And clearly they expected the Afghan government to last longer than it did. Biden was furious. He felt let down. He felt disappointed by his briefers. But in fairness to Biden and his team, I would say this, that...
He was disappointed with his briefers.
Yeah. In fairness to Biden and his team, I would say that the moment that Donald Trump, after that half-baked negotiation he had with the Taliban, the moment Trump announced that we would be out, the U.S. would be gone on May 1st, the writing was on the wall for the Afghan government and armed forces. They knew that, just as in Vietnam, they knew we were going to hit the road, and they hit the road first.
But, foreign policy, diplomacy 101 is that if you're going to withdraw, you don't tell the enemy the date you're going to withdraw.
Exactly.
They always attack you on the way out, and you have to anticipate there's going to be a problem. So that was a tremendous error of judgment, and you can lay that at the feet of Donald Trump.
Absolutely. And among other things, one of the problems they faced was that in March of 2020, the Trump administration had completely shut down the special visa program for getting Afghans and allies of ours out of the country. It was inadequate to begin with, and the Biden administration stepped it up when they came in. But it was just, it was nowhere near equal to the task of getting our friends and allies out. And there was also, I write about previously reported factor, which was that the CIA and the Defense Department were having a feud over who was going to be on those planes. And DOD had no idea that CIA was dumping its people on the tarmac, and they were clambering aboard the planes. And so this was not the Biden administration's finest hour by a long shot.
And perhaps not the CIA's finest hour.
Not theirs either.
But you move on to Ukraine, and there is both an intelligence success and a policy success because, number one, the CIA appreciated that Russian troops were massing on the border and would probably attack. And then there was a decision whether to keep that as a state secret or to communicate it publicly. And they decided to communicate it publicly, and that ended up to the great advantage of the alliance.
I tell that story in the book, and a lot of people speculated.
That's how I learned about it.
How did this? Whose decision was it? Whose idea was it to take that intelligence about all of that disinformation that the Russians were putting out there, faking events on the ground with dead bodies and all that stuff? Whose idea was it to weaponize that intelligence and put it out there? Well, it turns out it was Joe Biden's. Milley was briefing him in the Oval Office, and Biden couldn't believe what he was hearing. And he said, "Can you put that out? Can you make that public?" And Milley said, "I can't, Mr. President, but you can." And Avril Haines could, and she was the director of national intelligence, sitting a few seats away. So that was how that campaign began. And it was, I think, one of the CIA's finest hours, not just weaponizing the intelligence against Putin and keeping him on his back foot, but they had Putin dead to rights. They had the blueprint for the invasion. They had the signals intelligence, to the point where Bill Burns was able to make a secret visit to Zelensky before the invasion and brief him and tell him exactly what was going to unfold, and the Ukrainians were waiting for them.
So while we're on intelligence, we have the affair of the documents. Not in your book because you didn't know about it when you went to press, but what is that something that's going to blow over, or do you think that hurts Biden tremendously?
Well, I don't. Unless there's much more than meets the eye, I think I don't think we're going to be talking about it during the 2024 election. I think it'll be in the rearview mirror.
That's assuming Biden is the candidate.
Yeah, and he will be. He's running. Trust me. But I think it takes off the table the prospect of prosecuting Donald Trump for the documents at Mar-a-Lago. Merrick Garland would have to think long and hard about picking a jury for that case, knowing that the jury probably wouldn't find it all that egregious when documents keep surfacing every other day in Biden's houses. I just think that's got to be a factor. So I think it'll have that effect, but I don't think we'll be talking about it in 2024.
If he's a candidate, will Kamala Harris be the vice presidential nominee?
Without a doubt. Without a doubt.
Has he lost confidence in Kamala Harris? What's her performance rating?
Well, it's a complicated, fascinating relationship, and I write about it in the book. At the beginning, I think they had a genuine bond, and I think they probably still do. Joe Biden in the early stages always wanted her in almost every meeting. He valued her input. He sometimes followed her lead. She was great at questioning briefers and staffers. She's got those prosecutorial chops. Biden appreciated all that, liked her. Things got a little bit trickier, dicier, when She began to have some missteps over the Northern Triangle, for example, that trip to Guatemala where she fumbled that question from Lester Holt of NBC about the border and began to take fire. And what happened was that some of her allies were complaining that, and publicly, that she had been given mission impossible in effect, that her portfolio was too difficult. Nobody could really do anything about the Northern Triangle. Voting rights was a really heavy lift. She was being set up to fail. Well, Biden also heard through the grapevine that the second gentleman, Doug Imhoff, was going around saying this to friends around town. And this just didn't sit well with Joe Biden. He hadn't asked her to do anything he hadn't done as vice president under Obama. He had the Northern Triangle. She had asked for the voting rights portfolio. So at one point, a good friend of Biden's asked him, how's she doing? And he turned to her and he said, well, he said, a work in progress. So it's a complicated relationship. On the other hand, Biden has given her some important national security responsibilities. By all accounts, she's handled them well. There's a great story I tell in the book about Harris meeting privately with Volodymyr Zelensky on the eve of the invasion, where Zelensky is still skeptical. Maybe that's all I'll say, and without giving away a spoiler, but it's a great story.
Yeah, I remember. It's a great story in the book. Secret Service. Biden is distrustful of the Secret Service, at least was at first. Maybe you can talk about that a little bit. I
found this really surprising and startling. Early on, Biden during the transition had a very good relationship with the head of his Secret Service detail, and I don't think he had a history of any problems. But when he became president, that detail suddenly became enormous. And among his detail were clearly were some MAGA sympathizers. This bothered Biden on a number of levels. I don't think he ever felt that they wouldn't protect him. But there's a tradition in this country of where the Secret Service checks its politics at the door. They're supposed to be apolitical, nonpartisan creatures. That's supposed to be their DNA. And all you need to know for context here is that Donald Trump spent 4 years doing everything in his power to politicize the Secret Service. He took his most loyal agent and promoted him to Deputy White House Chief of Staff for Operations, which was a boldly political, unprecedented move. And don't forget, on January 6th, Mike Pence, in the loading dock of the Capitol building, refused to get into the car with the Secret Service detail because God only knew where they might take him. That was his attitude. He thought they might have been part of the MAGA plot. So that's the context for this, and I think it should trouble us that the President of the United States can't necessarily trust these guys to keep his secrets.
Okay, so we've come to the end, sadly, because this has been just fascinating. But I need to ask you a question. And my question is, Biden's popularity rating is around 42%. Many say he's too old to be president or to run again. Has he won the fight of his life, or is the jury still out?
The jury is well and truly out. It's a political thriller, I said before, and it's a thriller with no ending yet. I think that when it comes to approval ratings, they're not what they used to be. We're living in much more partisan times than ever, and I think it's harder to have a high approval rating given the divisions in the country. And Ron Klain likes to point out that at this point in his presidency, Reagan's approval rating was 33%. Biden's is 42%, as you pointed out. He's got tremendous challenges ahead. This is an octogenarian running a bruising re-election battle, or soon to be running one. He's got an untested new chief of staff. I think Jeff Zients is tremendously talented. He's a genius at making government work. He's a great manager, but he doesn't have that long relationship with the boss or Ron Klain's political savvy. I think that Joe Biden not only has to do all the obvious things, avoid a recession, control inflation, all of the things we expect him to do, but he also has to, I think, make clear, underline, and reemphasize the stakes of defeating Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. For Vladimir Putin, conquering Ukraine is existential. For the U.S. and the West, stopping him is existential. I think Biden believes that, and I think that's going to be, and has been, the fight of his life.
So the answer is the fight of his life is existential. So Chris Whipple, thank you so much for coming by. This has been just marvelous. And thank you for coming by. Tune in next week for more conversations. I'm Jim Zirin. Take care, be well, and all the best.